Good morning, everyone. My name is Vitalija Impolevičienė. I'm co-head of ESG service with Sorainen. I will be a moderator of this webinar. We would like to inform you that this webinar will be recorded and we will share the recording after the event. So welcome to the regional series of Sorainen webinars on ESG. Today we will focus on ESG aspects in mergers and acquisitions. The duration of the event is 1.5 hours. Over the next 1 hour, our speakers will share their insights and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the event. If you have questions, don't hesitate to provide them via the Q&A tool. We will monitor the questions coming in and later in the session, we will address as many as possible. Now, a warm welcome to our speakers. Eva Berlaus, the country managing partner of the Sorainen office in Latvia and head of the Latvian corporate and M&A practice group, will give a short introduction to the topic. We are also very happy to have Ruta Skarulske, head of ESG and impact at Contrarian Ventures. We also have Martina Farkas, corporate M&A partner at Linklaters Hamburg, and Jurgita Giržadienė, sustainability and better packaging director at Smurfit Kappa. We hope that this will be an insightful exploration of the topic. And now, Eva, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. It's good to see so many of you joined. A short introduction from me on why this topic and at this time. In addition to renewables, we see that there is a rise of also other transactions where ESG is one of the main value drivers. As investments into the companies with larger potential positive impact, for example, on environment, are currently seen as something more attractive by investors. And for example, a local champion, our beloved client Baltics, is a good example. Of course, even larger evidence to ESG as a value driver is the rise of venture and private equity capital funds, which are purely focused on investments into climate tech and other companies directly dealing with climate change. And one of our guests, Contrarian Ventures, is a very good example of that. And I cannot wait to hear from them. We also start seeing in Norwegian transactions that are done for the purpose of creating bases for offsetting carbon emissions. And one of our large industrial clients, Solar, which is a Danish sourcing and services company, mainly with electrics, heating and plumbing and ventilation, but also climate and energy solutions, just bought a portfolio of land properties in Latvia. The transaction was closed literally a day ago, with plans to afforestate the land in near future. We also see that ESG as a topic is more and more present also in transactions in industries not directly related to environment or other ESG aspects. For example, most of the largest venture and private equity funds do perform ESG due diligence of targets. Yet the level of detail of the and the form of those is still very diverse. You can see many exercises where the due diligence is done formally to tick the box, so to say, but we also start seeing more and more exercises with substance. What we also see that there is more and more discussing ESG, not only during the due diligence phase, but also during the transaction negotiations, for example, as regards the potential information submissions as regards ESG reporting to be done by the targets, etc., etc. And therefore, we believe that like one way or the other, ESG and M&A, and of course related private equity and venture capital will be impacting the scene more and more, and it's worth paying attention, and therefore also exchanging ideas, sharing best practices and trends. And of course, the topic is very large. We cannot cover it in possibly in one webinar, but we hope that this one will be a good insight into the theme, and we hope to continue with more detailed webinars also in relation to ESG and M&A and private equity and venture capital. So welcome all. We hope that this will be a good morning for you to start your day, and let's proceed with the presentations.
Thank you very much, Eva. So our first speaker is Ruta Skarulske from venture capital firm Contrarian Ventures. Dear Ruta, welcome to our virtual stage, and please tell us why ESG matters in investment process.
Well, hello everyone once again. As Vitalija has mentioned, my name is Ruta Skarulske. I'm head of ESG and impact at Contrarian Ventures. So we are a venture capital fund, which has a focus on investments into the climate tech. So before we start, I will just make a notice here that actually the ESG integration is like a holistic approach, which all of the investors really need to take as a journey. It's not like some of the things you might do at the beginning of the investment, or maybe just to report on those things. Here are the main questions I will try to answer today, and doesn't matter in which of the stage you are, if you have already included some of the ESG considerations into the investment process, or maybe you're looking already how to do this and what would be the reason to do that. So we're gonna start with firstly why to do this. Why to integrate those factors, and I'm going to cover a bit from our own perspective as we are already like in this journey. Secondly, look into how you can possibly integrate those factors into the whole process, that it wouldn't be, like a very short stage of your investment. And lastly, why investees should focus on that, because actually if there are already requirements or need for compliance from the investor side, indeed the investees really need to be aware about those and look into what kind of benefit that might bring apart, just to come into the investment. Good. So I think we can start with firstly why to integrate. And you can see here, like I have put 4 main factors as an investment strategy: regulatory compliance, access to capital, and then risk management. And actually all of these factors are very much interlinked. And once you have defined the very clear investment strategy and like what's the purpose of that, and that again like interlinks with the regulatory compliance, I'm pretty sure that you have heard at least the sustainable finance disclosure regulation, which brings into the market a need for all of the financial products to be classified or to be disclosing under 6, 8, or 9 article. So we as a fund, we are disclosing under SFDR Article 8 at the moment, and we have a very clear investment strategy, like what kind of objectives do we have, what kind of metrics we are going to look into, what kind of metrics and KPIs we will be tracking. So actually it already, gives us a sense like what is the goal and what are the procedures we are going to follow. And this regulatory compliance, again, they have these requirements for all of the financial products to be classified, meaning that if you're staying as this Article 6, you're not promoting any kind of social or environmental characteristics, or you don't have the sustainable investments as an objective, going to the factor as access to capital. Lots of the institutional investors in Europe, actually, they are not even looking into those financial products if you are not reporting or considering those. So meaning that you can be actually already out of scope if you don't have the procedures, policies, or the investment strategy interlinked with the characteristics related to at least environmental or social factors. And it doesn't mean that your investments needs to be like 100% compliant and you have to invest only into the sustainable things, but at least like in your investment strategy, you are considering those. So at least you are like tracking some of the metrics, you are informing your investees about this process. It already brings sort of a clarity for you as an investor, what you want to do with the investments, but at the same time, it's a very strong signal to the investors of yours that you are considering and implementing those procedures. And lastly, looking into the risks as well, like in the long-term performance, it gives this value as you are looking into the way broader list of possible risks and actually opportunities, what kind of impact that might make to the maybe assets you own or the assets which are owned by the investees of yours. And you are looking into the materiality assessment, meaning like to evaluate what kind of financial impact if those risks occur might have for your investments. So as I said, like once you have this very clear investment strategy defined, you are following the compliance which is in place. It brings a very transparent and consistent procedures internally. It's very easy to follow for you, and it's very easy to be able to report and to stay transparent on the scope of your own investors, market, and any other stakeholders which are related to your business. Good, and we can move on to the next slide. So like, okay, you decide, or maybe you already had those considerations in place, like you have a list defined what kind of metrics you are looking into, what kind of KPIs maybe you are tracking and aiming to achieve, and you have this clear characteristics from the investment strategy. What you need to make sure that there is this whole journey internally and all of the stakeholders are aware. So it's not only that at the beginning of the investment, you just fulfill the due diligence. Firstly, what needs to be in place, like a very clear policies and requirements. The team internally is aware, like what kind of factors needs to be followed. So firstly, like once you are looking into the investment, just be sure that you conduct this due diligence process, that the investment actually complies with your requirements, with the objectives you have for your own investment strategy, and you're really very much conducting this internal analysis just to make sure that going forward, it really complies with all of the strategy you have internally. Secondly, to be sure that actually it is communicated and the investee is aware about what kind of metrics and KPIs will be needed to be reported and how you're going to measure and to report to your investors that, all right, that's what you said that you're going to do, you're really doing those and complying. And lastly, transparency and reporting. So this is actually what is SFDR mainly about, to make sure that, you know, all of the investors, they are using at least like the very similar drafts and templates of information to report that they can be easily compared in between, talking about the financial products, and you have this whole journey implemented internally. So actually, that's like, it's a huge benefit for us. I mean, from our own perspective. So we know that for each of the investment, we are going to follow the very same way, the very same journey. Maybe some of the metrics and KPIs can differ, indeed, like depending on what kind of investment that is, or a business you are investing into. And talking about this active ownership and engagement. So once you have this whole journey, make sure that actually you are reaching out and you're in constant dialogue and conversation with your investees. So like what we might do at the beginning of due diligence, you might see that maybe the investee is missing out of some of the policies. Maybe they are not tracking some of the metrics or data points you have to report and you are looking into, but just to make sure that you are helping those, like in upcoming couple of years, you are defining what kind of steps for each of the year needs to be achieved and like what kind of things should be implemented internally. So it's not like maybe at the beginning you are just cutting because it doesn't comply with your requirements, but just to make sure that actually you're helping and you're working together with the investee. Maybe for them it's like completely new topic and they are not aware about the main requirements which are expected from your side, but you are helping them, you are in constant contact. And we, for example, as a fund, we are one of the organizers of Tech Summit here in Europe. So in this summit, we provide just an opportunity, for example, for our founders to go there to talk about the main problems, about the possible solutions, to promote their own product. So, I mean, it just very depends on your investment strategy, what kind of assets do you hold, and how can you help your investees or any kind of other stakeholders to raise those questions, you know, and to help them to stay in this journey and to achieve a results. So then why investees should focus on that? All right, maybe you as an investor, you have this list of requirements, you are complying with the regulations, and you have all of this journey in place. But then looking from the perspective of investee, like why should they be in the first place aware and pay attention to those requirements? And again, like these are very much interlinked one with another. And once if you are fine on one factor and looking into the others there, you are actually having this very defined and consistent process already, which is helping you a lot once talking firstly to the investors, secondly, in terms of market competition. So like from the access to capital, again, as I have mentioned, like the investors and we as well as an investor and as a fund, we have very clearly defined like what are the requirements, what are the objectives of our own investment. So if the investee is aware what is requested in the market, right? And what are the needs of the investor, actually, you can way easily access this capital to be compliant with the requirements. And it means as well for the investor that you are looking into the long-term performance, you know, of your fund in way broader terms, especially in the risk management perspective, that you're not only looking into those as everyone in the market, but on the top, you're just adding an additional layer of factors, risk, or maybe opportunities to consider. Secondly, market opportunities. So looking into the main demands from the consumers, but at the same time from the businesses in market, you can really see that one of the most important factors, apart from looking into the sustainable products, not necessarily maybe you are providing those or kind of services, software, what is your value chain and how you're looking into that one, because that is a huge risk and not all of the companies or businesses, they are evaluating those. So that is one an additional factor that if you're looking into that one, if you're considering that one, it provides you as well a bigger scope of needs from the market, and at the same time, what are the main problems and what kind of solutions you can provide to them. As I have mentioned about the risk management, so that is like a way broader list of risks which you are considering and you are looking into, and what kind of negative impact that might make, and at the same time, what kind of opportunities this could bring to you as a business, you know, and to have it as an additional factor in terms of competition in the market and when talking to your investors. And the supply chain management, again, it's like super important. Again, like the investors are looking into that, and in our due diligence questionnaires, we have this to look into how does it go, and like, do you evaluate or do you have any kind of requirements to your stakeholders in terms of supply? So again, if you are at least thinking about it or looking into that one, that's an additional bonus from the investor perspective, but again, to you as a business as well. So it's not only focused, to access the capital, but at the same time to manage your own risks, your own operations, and just to include it in the processes. And in terms of brand for the investees, so firstly, just to have this very consistent and clear strategy that your mainly employees and then stakeholders are aware, like what's the goal and like what's the main strategy of the business and how the ESG consideration brings a value to that as well. And the innovation and resilience, so it's more like you as a business, you're way more flexible and adjustable maybe to some of the changing circumstances in the market, or maybe some of the additional requirements coming over from the investors or from the compliance. You're just more aware about what is going on there and where you should pay more of the attention. Good, and we can move to the very last slide. This is like an overview, just to look into what's the main thing for investor to consider. So again, as I said, like once you have this very consistent and defined framework and the investment strategy and objectives and KPIs in place, it's very easy for you as an investor to have this overview of your whole portfolio, to see what are the additional risks in terms of sustainability or like any kind of climate risks. So it's easy for you to know your standing point. It's easy as well to report and to provide these insights to the your investors and like to the market overall. In terms of integration, again, just make sure that you have this consistent framework, starting from the policies, the diligence, and finishing with any kind of active ownership and engagement with your investees. And for the investees, so as I mentioned, mainly it is access to capital in terms of competition and the needs from any other companies and customers. And then looking into the market opportunities and branding, just be aware what is needed currently in the market, like what are the main issues to be solved, and maybe you can really be ahead comparing to the otherwise your competitors in the market. Good. Yeah, and actually that's it from me. I tried to cover, those from both of the perspectives. So hope it was helpful or insightful for the listeners.
Yes, so thank you very much, Ruta. It was really great, guidance starting from why and going to how, and touching upon both investors and investee companies' perspective. Now let's move to our next speaker, and let's see how this process looks from lawyer's point of view. So Martina Farkas is a corporate M&A partner at law firm Linklaters in Hamburg, and she will guide us through various M&A transaction cycles and will explain how various ESG factors might become relevant at each stage. Dear Martina, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you, Vitalija. Good morning, everyone from Germany. So there is one point up front. There is a increased integration of ESG into M&A activity. And if you look at the hot topics that we had in 23, and I'm currently writing an article about those topics and an outlook for 24, it's definitely something that will remain. So ESG is a topic that came to stay. It's not a trend, it's business as usual. A few years ago, we were saying it's just something that is relevant for green and impact funds, but nowadays it's relevant for any sector, any geographical target that you're looking at. And I thought it would be an easy way to show you where is it actually relevant in a private M&A process, to show you a whole M&A transaction cycle. Because when summarizing this hot topic in 23, what I can confirm that in particular in this year, we have seen ESG relevant aspects in every single milestone that we have seen in a private M&A deal. when I said I will give you an insight on the life cycle, maybe to divide it into 4 points for my agenda in the next 20 minutes. So my life cycle would be defined as the first milestone would be the target identification, the screening process. What am I acquiring from a buy-side perspective? Then we would look deeper into the legal or tech due diligence. The third point would be negotiation. So how do we deal with those topics in a shareholders agreement in the SPA? And I would close with a topic on post-closing aspects or post-closing integration. On the current status, so deal makers are expecting ESG to increase. So this is why it's also one of the topics of my outlook for 24. But why is that the case? Why had it such a great impact in 23 and will have an even more, a bigger impact on 24? I think it's really about regulation. So ESG used to be a soft topic, a topic that has been around, that everybody was dealing with somehow without a clear regulation on it. Nowadays, we have from soft law, it's becoming more and more, and not only on a national, but also on a European level. And Ruta just mentioned it, hard law. And I think that it has a great impact on sellers, buyers, and the targets. If you look, I have mentioned here just a few examples on regulations. You have the French duty of vigilance law. They're really, when you look at the liability side, it's something that has a big impact on the target that is actually applying that law, because it has liabilities for the target, for the managing directors. I mean, I do have my German glasses on and can only confirm that by the introduction this year on the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, targets are really struggling in order to understand what they need to report on. And the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, just to give you a touch and feel on that regulation, it's applicable for German companies with at least 3,000 employers, and they need to ask their direct suppliers or customers whether they are ESG conform. Now, I'm talking about direct suppliers, but in certain cases, it's also applied for indirect suppliers. And in the next year, so from January on, it will also be applied for employers, for companies with employers with at least 1,000 employees. So it will be even more applicable on the German market. Now, I don't want to focus very much on the German market. I really want to have a European perspective today. But we do have the same topic on the European level. I don't know how many of you have dealt with it's called the CSDDD, and it's actually a European regulation that is very similar to what I've just said about the German regulation. It will only be applicable for less than 1,000 employees, and it has quite some low threshold. So when this comes, I think that ESG will remain, so to say, a hot topic in the private M&A market for quite some time. But let's start with the cycle. When we start with the first phase, it's the target identification on the screening phase. Eva has mentioned it at the very beginning. I think it's fair to say that ESG in this year has been at the same level like evaluation. So previously, if you're looking into a target from a buy-side perspective, you would have looked at the balance sheet. What buyers nowadays do, they also look very much into ESG aspects. So this year, we have a client, and the client was on the buy side, and they have involved us very early in the process. And what I found quite interesting to see the thinking of the buyer, namely, they have looked into the balance, and on the other hand, because they're stakeholders, and there is one particularity about this client, it's a publicly listed company. So their stakeholders had a very clear view that the next year, meaning this year, all private M&A or all M&A transaction had to be in relation to ESG compliant targets. And the deal team that has been looking very closely into that target realized that there are some, we call them brown assets. And at the end of the day, we never really kicked off the due diligence phase because the deal team said, listen, our stakeholders have a very clear view on what they want to invest. And I think this is nothing that would fit into our ESG strategy, and we don't see really ways in how to integrate that target into our group, so they decided not to further pursue. So it's driven by stakeholders, it's driven by ESG commitments of the targets, and I think it has just a great impact and leads to the fact that due diligence, so one part of the due diligence that we have seen previously only later in the process, is really front-loaded. So we have seen that this year in relation to merger control, foreign direct investment topics, and nowadays is also ESG, because it's a topic that has been front-loaded because seller and buyer want to have the certainty not to spend a lot of money into looking into a target that is not really suitable, so they are doing it upfront. Let me continue with the second milestone. And the second milestone, or the second step in my transaction life cycle, is the due diligence. So it doesn't matter if it's really a legal or a tech due diligence. What I'm really not aware of is that there is something like an ESG DD. So ESG DD has always existed if you look deeper into it. It hasn't been labeled as ESG DD because why? Employment is relevant, compliance is relevant, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, contamination, that is all ESG. And we have been conducting ESG due diligence, so to say, for the past 10 years. But nowadays, there is a request to deal with ESG as a separate topic. So when we started due diligence on the buy side, what we usually have is like a catalog of DD request list where we require ESG relevant documents from the target. And it's a separate topic. So obviously, we still have the section on employee relevant topics, on compliance, on contamination. But all of a sudden, we have a very separate section that deals with ESG topics. And if I just go further on the slide, we will now look at it. So this is from a buy side, right? I'm requesting you to provide me as a seller with relevant ESG documents. But looking from a sell side perspective, where can we actually find those documents? And I'm just going a little bit further into the slide because, and that's the next slide, I think it's easier to understand it. What are actually possible sources from information? And I think Eva mentioned it at the beginning as well. She said, not a lot of targets actually contain documents that relate to ESG. So if you look into startups, it's a really new topic where we don't have a folder in our archive as a seller where all ESG relevant topics are summarized. So you really, as a seller, you have to prepare for it in the sense of if you don't have it summarized, prepare it, because in any case, it will be requested. And as a target, I mean, it does depend in which sector are you working, in which geography. So to exaggerate, but if you're producing tofu in Brazil, the due diligence request list on ESG will look very different than if you're having like a tech company that is dealing with CO2 reduction. So it really depends what is the target doing, in which business is it active, in order to understand how intense do you need to prepare those documents. If the data room, for example, does not contain a whole bunch of documents that are ESG relevant, there are different ways to give the buyer also comfort. So what we have seen in the past year, and we have been taking place in some of the management sessions, is that all of a sudden ESG is part of the management session. So it means that the buyer is using the opportunity to have the management in front of them in order to ask, so what are you doing on ESG topics? What's your strategy on that? How are you reporting? How are you monitoring? So even though there are no written documents, it's a nice way in order to give further comfort to the buyer from the sell side perspective. Obviously, the third topic that you can see here is publicly accessible sources. To say it out simple, Google it. Reputation is, and ESG might have a big impact on the reputation of a target. If you Google it, there might be some indications that the target had issues on certain reputational topics. I mean, I had some transaction in the logistics sector this year, and if you look at employee conditions, working hours, these are topics that are very reputational and can be found via publicly data searches. And the very last source is also ESG rating or agency, NGOs that are dealing with those topics. So ideally, you would have a target that has an ESG rating or a certificate, but obviously it does not apply for every target. So it's nothing that you can rely on, but something that's worth looking into, whether it's applicable or not. So let me go back to my transaction life cycle and continue with the next point. And now I will come to the SPA. So we have finalized our due diligence and we're starting negotiations. And it doesn't really matter if you are having a share purchase agreement, an asset purchase agreement, a shareholders agreement, a side letter, whatever it is, ESG is playing a role all of a sudden. And in my summary that I'm currently writing on hot topics in 23 or new developments is that I can summarize that if you look, and let's take a share purchase agreement because I think it's a very easy example. I would say there are 4 parts in an agreement where it actually plays a role or has played a role in a certain transaction. The warranty section is quite important on ESG. So anything with regard to reps and warranties, the covenant section, the indemnity section, and the post-closing section. Let me give you a further insight into those specific sections. And I think I'll also go further into the next slide. So the example on a share purchase agreement, I mean, warranties are obviously something where you request the seller a guarantee for unknown risk. And there was no such a thing like an ESG guarantee. Again, as I mentioned in the due diligence process, we had employee relevant guarantees, we had contamination, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, etc. Well, nowadays, and I'm saying in this slide, compliance with due diligence obligation in the supply chain, value chain, and this is, for example, in Germany, the law, the regulation that has been implemented for this year, this is very much changing. What I'm saying here, because all of a sudden there is such a thing like an ESG warranty, because I've seen quite some transaction this year where a warranty has been requested, and I'm looking now at the German target, that they request to confirm that the target is not in breach with anything that relates to this German Supply Chain Act. So all of a sudden, there is a change, and we are looking into ESG specific warranties. Also interesting, I had some of those deals had a W&I insurance, and when talking to brokers in the W&I area, they are saying, oh, the market is getting very loud and buyers are requesting for an ESG relevant warranty. So all of a sudden, it's also applicable for the W&I market. So I'm really looking forward to see what is happening, in particular in this W&I area in 24, because I think it will have a great impact on the W&Is as well. Going further on the covenants. So covenant, when you look at the covenants that are relevant in particular for the sell side measures, and if you look, let's say, into a transaction that has quite some long period between signing and closing, you will see that there are some requests on the sell side to take care of certain aspects that have been flagged in the due diligence. So if, for example, the diversity aspects in recruiting, you know, the sales side will need to recruit new employees and they're not diverse enough. Then you would ask the seller to include a covenant that requests to look into diversity when looking out for new employees. The same applies not to take any measures that might have a negative impact on the ESG compliance of the target. Then the next topic would be indemnity. Indemnity, obviously nothing that the sell side really enjoys, but we have also seen indemnities in particular in relation to the new Supply Chain Act in Germany. because BIASA is saying, okay, that's a new act. We don't know how the authorities will react after a year, because you're proposed to submit a report on compliance with the Supply Chain Act. And targets don't know whether it's sufficient or not, whether they need to expect any fines. So buyers are asking for an indemnity in the event that the fine comes up in the next year post-closing. And in that case, there is only one. I mean, obviously, the indemnity will probably be limited in time and thresholds. But one point that I would like to mention, reputational risk is nothing that you can really be indemnified for, because you don't know how to put a number behind that. So that's something to be kept in mind. And the very last point that I would like to mention in my share purchase agreement is the post-closing integration. So sometimes sellers would request a buyer to make sure that anything that is not yet implemented is implemented as soon as possible, so that the target really remains ESG compliant. So it's really about a shift that even post-closing, you as a seller want to make sure that anything that has been started is also implemented and the target remains ESG compliant. So that would be, from my perspective, a whole cycle that I have been mentioned here, please, if there are any questions that you may have, write them down and use the time after the session in order to discuss further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martina, for such a well-structured and really very interesting presentation. I found it especially interesting how you explain how you deal with various ESG-related risks in the SPA, and I hope that we will have possibility to discuss this during the Q&A session. I would also like to encourage our audience to ask questions via Q&A tool, as we have really experienced speakers. We can discuss if something is particularly interesting for you. And now let's move to our next speaker, Jurgita Giržadienė. She is a Sustainability and Better Packaging Director at Smurfit Kappa, one of the largest paper-based packaging producers in the world. And I know that Jurgita will not only give us an overview of the company's sustainability agenda and targets, but will also share some information about their recent acquisitions. So Jurgita, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am today reaching out to you from Amsterdam, Smurfit Kappa Global Experience Center. And I said I will give you a little bit of introduction on, first of all, who we are, Smurfit Kappa, one of the largest paper-based packaging companies in the world. And as Martina correctly said, that ESG came here to stay. I would say it even came not yesterday, but for Smurfit Kappa, we are on our journey on sustainability, I would say, since 2005. And that is also has a reason because of the merger, because in 2005, two companies, Smurfit and Kappa, merged. And therefore, that was also for us the beginning of our sustainability kind of benchmark. Our baseline is 2005. So let me give you a little bit of introduction who we are. So we are the largest paper-based packaging company in Europe and one of the largest in the world. And maybe I will not touch upon that too much today because we are still in the process, but we are merging with American company Vestrock, which will be then probably next year. So we will see where that merger will take us. And today we are big forest owners, not in Europe. In Europe, we don't own forest. We are having paper mills and converting operations to produce packaging, paper-based packaging. We're number one in bag-in-box packaging in Europe, and we are the largest, very large, let's say, Pan-American producer of paper-based packaging. What we do, we are integrated company, as I said, from the forest to the paper. So we are producing containerboard paper predominantly. Then it is packaging, and you can probably see around me here. I am today presenting from our Global Experience Center. So there is a lot of packaging samples, and believe me, there are much more examples of packaging we are producing. Basically everything which is produced at whatever industry it is, be it dairy, be it electronics, be it e-commerce, be it drinks, beverages, everything needs to be transported from producer to consumer somehow, or via e-commerce or via retail sales channel. So here we help with paper-based packaging. The beauty of paper-based packaging is that it is renewable raw material. So also kind of, as we say, sustainability and ESG is in our DNA. We are our main raw material, trees, are renewable source, and the paper-based packaging is the highest collected and recycled globally. So we are also very much responsible to buying back used packaging into our recycling operations. Now, a little bit about our one of the main drivers also of sustainability agenda is customers. So investors, of course, is very important part, and we heard already a lot about investors, let's say, thinking and judging and challenging on sustainability. But let's not forget that one of the main drivers in sustainability is the consumers and customers. Our base of customers is, as you see, a lot of big brands. And if you look how they are positioning also their brands as sustainable brands, as we heard that a lot of businesses are taking sustainability now as really one of the differentiators and drivers, you see those brands made commitments. They made commitments that their products will become carbon neutral, that there is, of course, Paris Agreement. There is a EU Green Deal, which says that by 2050, we have to become net zero, right? But the brands and companies who are producing branded products, they are making their targets earlier. So there is an initiative, for example, Paris 10 years earlier, which is initiated by Amazon, and many, many big brands of the world are also making this commitment to become net zero 2040. Which means immediately that entire value chain has also to step up and become climate neutral earlier. So talking about our sustainability agenda. So remember I said in 2005, Smurfit and Kappa merged and we started our sustainability journey. The first time we published our sustainable development report was in 2007. So since 2007, annually, we are publicly reporting how are we doing on our sustainability journey. And when I say a journey, it was really and continues to be a journey. It was, we were going through different targets making. And in the beginning, in 2007, we had a lot of lines of targets. Then we kind of stepped up and said, no, too many lines are confusing, not possible to monitor, not possible to report very clearly. So we defined 7 building blocks, we called them at that time. Then later on, we also decided that, sustainability has to be also driver, not only internally, but also externally. So we need to communicate clearly internally and externally, what are we talking about? What is on our sustainability agenda? So since then, I think since 2012, we have those 5 core focus strategic areas: climate change, forest, water, waste, and people. And the people pillar, there are even more granularity. We have health and safety, then we have communities with our foundation, etc. But four of those 5 targets are environmental targets. And one of them, which I will maybe expand a little bit more today in my presentation, is climate change. So on our climate change target, we had commitments also over the year, developing commitments. So at certain point in time, back in 2010, maybe we had a commitment 20% reduction of CO2 emission by 2020. Then we achieved, then we increased the target. So now our target is compliant with the EU Green Deal, so minus 55% by 2030, with the baseline of 2005. and that is strategic decision again. And it might look that, okay, we are going too much back in the history. And we kind of are very open about that. It is one of the challenges which we are constantly discussing with our customers, but still we keep that baseline up until now, because it's also, we are proud of that baseline. We are proud that we were already on this journey since 2005, that we are measuring everything since 2005. We are relating everything what we are doing today since 2005 baseline. And we have achieved a lot. We have achieved 43.9% of fossil CO2 emissions reductions from our scope 1 and 2 since 2005 by the end of 2022. This is a very huge achievement, and why it is also important for us to discuss and talk about these achievements is because we are scope 1 company. We are the company who is very energy intensive, and means we are the ones who actually make the impactful change. We are the ones who need to find energy solutions, energy transition solutions for the future. And therefore, this climate change target is really meaningful for us. If you would see, remember I showed the companies who are our customers. If you look to their climate change targets, majority of their climate change targets are in scope 3, which means they demand from their value chain to work on the decarbonization. While for us, it's very important to look at our own operations. As integrated company, we are responsible for our biggest emissions, which is paper making. So therefore, it's our direct investment in our process to reduce emissions. Then we have targets in forestry. So responsible forestry, no involvement in deforestation. This target we measure by being chain of custody certified, and there are global certification schemes like FSC, PFC. So if you buy packaging from Smurfit Kappa, you will have by default the chain of custody certification claim on the invoice, which assures that value chain is in order and there is no deforestation practices involved. Martina earlier mentioned that how can you check if companies are having robust sustainability or ESG agendas, and how do they perform? And the advice was also very good advice, sometimes just Google. I can also say that, well, you see here, Evelyn, maybe you can show the slide with all evaluations also from external accreditations, evaluations, memberships we have from external ratings and memberships. So next to it, I would say there is, if you evaluate, for example, social, ethical risks, SEDEX organization gives from time to time very good, insightful reports around different industries, what kind of social risks and let's say challenges there are. Science-based target is very good. Also public database where you can find companies who have committed to reduce their emissions, and if their targets are SBTi approved, that means they're really following the latest science advice and trends of. So lately, if you apply for SBTi target, you have to comply with 1.5 degree, and you are going to absolute target versus relative. I will come in a second, in a couple of slides. What does it mean? So those are, CDP is one of another also source of information where you can see companies reporting to CDP. They are also evaluated by they are giving certain status. They are evaluated annually on climate, forest, and water areas with A, B, C, D. So the higher the A is the highest ratings. So there is a lot of also information available really just by Googling and finding around companies to understand where they stand, how do they report, how transparent they are, how credible they are. Yeah, so a little bit on challenges. So I will dive with specific examples in all three of those areas. As I said, Smurfit Kappa, we have climate change target, -55 2030 versus 2005 baseline, and net zero by 2050. And here we have a couple of challenges: global versus local, relative versus absolute, and baseline, and how to deal with that. So global versus local. We are a global company, and every target we have is global target. We have never, we discussed, of course, that many times, but we have decided never to split those targets and, let's say, to have European, because European agenda is a little bit more challenging, right? In Europe, we have EU Green Deal, so it gives a little bit different framework, let's say, versus the rest of the world. In Europe, for example, if we don't look just for climate, but for deforestation, we have new legislation in UDR, which is out, which is again placing much more stricter requirements on European used forest materials or materials which are coming from possible deforestation links on European market, which is not, let's say, relevant in the rest of the world. Landfills, when we talk about waste, also Europe has certain approach with landfills where with circularity entire principle, where the use of resource should be found always as a priority versus landfill, where resources are actually just lost, is also a certain strategy in Europe versus the rest of the world. Nevertheless, Smurfit Kappa always had all the targets global. And that sometimes brings certain tensions because, for example, in this case, I'm showing you example from our Kali paper mill, one of the largest virgin paper mills we have. In paper making, you have virgin mills, which make paper predominantly from tree, and recycled paper mills, which make paper predominantly from recovered paper back from the market, right? So virgin mill has the advantage of using biomass as a fuel. And remember, I told you that we are very energy intensive company, which means immediately we are also CO2 intensive company. So for us, biomass is one of the way how to work on our decarbonization, as biomass is CO2 neutral fuel. So investment, this kind of investment, almost $100 million, is a huge investment, is a huge impact in our fossil CO2 reduction, because currently the mill is working with fossil fuel. It will move to biofuel, but that is global impact. What does that mean? That for our local, or I would say not local, European customers, it's a little bit of challenge because it is not direct impact on our European customers' climate change reduction target. So we always have to play this, you know, when is global makes sense and when is European doesn't contribute to much more demanding European customers' requirements. How do we play, not forgetting that, you know, all investment should be only in Europe, not in the rest of the world. So that is also always a challenge which we have to explain, be very transparent to customers that, okay, this is big investment in Colombia. Nevertheless, we have a lot of the planning of investments in Europe on a smaller scale, but still giving big impact. Acquisitions. From time to time, we are a growing company. From time to time, we acquire paper mills, and paper mill acquisition is really a big one. I mean, I'm not talking about small acquisitions. We acquire smaller, I think this year we acquired 3 or 4 converting plants, which is relatively small. Just to give you the scale, in Europe, we have 200 converting plants, so the ones which convert the paper into corrugated board and consequently into packaging, and we have approximately 20 paper mills. So this is the scale. So this 200 converting plants are converting the production, as we are integrated company, almost 90 above%. So those 20 mills production of paper is converted by 200 plants. Therefore, paper mill is much bigger impact from environmental part, and always think if you have carbon footprint of the box, 80%. About 80% comes from paper making. The paper making is much more energy intensive process. So how do we do with acquisitions? As growing company, so last year, well, 2 years ago, we acquired the large recycled paper mill in Italy, Verzuolo. And then our strategy is we add the operation we acquired to the company reporting after it is full year under company umbrella. So starting from 2022, Verzuolo is added in our reporting. So we are publishing our annual sustainable development report, where per each paper mill, you can find how much paper and what type of paper it produces, how much of what kind of fuel it uses, energy, electricity from the grid, CO2 related, scope 1, scope 2, and all kind of measures like waste created, like water intake, water output, water measurements, water quality measurements, etc. So in 2022, Verzuolo was added to our reporting, means also the emissions of Verzuolo, scope 1 and 2 we added, but that also means we added it to the baseline of 2005. Because our target for now is relative. That means we are reporting and we try to achieve minus 55 by 2030 with the baseline of 2005 on scope 1 and 2 per ton of paper. That is how it works today, and that is our SBTi approved target. Nevertheless, in the meantime, SBTi has changed the approach, which is correct because the world is not delivering enough. So we have to be more ambitious. We have to be more strict. So the new regulations in SBTi, when you apply with new target verification, you will have to apply to absolute reduction. So that will bring us also a challenge. How do you deal as a growing company with absolute targets on your business, especially when you are, like we are, scope 1 company? So it's not coming biggest emissions from your value chain, but it's your own. We actually need really energy transition solution, technology solutions, how we can move away from fossil fuels. And of course, we have agenda. We have 4 areas, 4 pillars, how we are reducing energy consumption, reusing energy waste, because we are very, as I said, very energy intensive company. We're using electricity and steam. So wherever you have steam waste, which can be reused in the process. We have CHPs, combined heat and power plants, to be efficient in energy generation. And of course, we look to all new sources, be it solar, wind, geothermal, but also hydrogen. We are running also the biggest green hydrogen pilot project in the world in one of our French paper mills to also experiment how we can generate, store, and use green hydrogen in the future. Electrification is also on the let's say on our scope of investigation. But just to give you the perspective, so you always have to consider, okay, acquisitions, they are going to have impact for now for us also on the baseline of 2005 and in the first year when the company is under umbrella, and in the future with absolute, that will have even bigger impact. And baseline. So our baseline of 2005, why I say it might not seem, okay, it's almost 20 years old. Is it good? Is it bad? If you look to SBTi, so Science Based Target Initiative, probably the oldest baseline you can find there will be 2015, but typically companies applying for SBTi would have baseline 2019 or 2020. So 2005 is really kind of outdated. Nevertheless, here comes the challenge a bit. So in a way, you feel you are punished if you started your sustainability activities and journey a long time ago, and initiatives like SBTi do not recognize that. So maybe if you compare yourself versus peers, you are in totally different situation because your relative emission per ton of paper is twice lower than the rest in the market. But because you have started your journey already decades ago, you are not recognized as the reduction is still applied with the same principle. You still have to achieve minus, well, for us, it will be minus 46% by 2030 with a baseline of 2019. So that brings challenges because, of course, when we started in 2005, by 2022, all low-hanging fruits are already done, already collected. So we are really at the point that we are really stretching the efficiencies. You can gain a bit, but not that much. So how do we of course are considering new baseline, but then also how not to lose that entire huge reduction we have done since 2005. We don't want completely to lose. We want to find still value in it. One of the values will, of course, stay there, whichever baseline you have, that in the meantime, we managed to create the culture of caring about climate change, the culture of constantly looking in how to look for opportunities in energy efficiency, in energy transition, in new technologies development. And I mean, consider anything appearing in the market and see smaller or larger scale pilots where we can participate in order to see those technologies would be fitting for our processes. So nevertheless, we still have very, for me as a sustainability and better planet packaging director in Smurfit Kappa, it's a fantastic journey. It's every day exciting to be involved in new innovations from process perspective, but also from packaging. So as you remember, 65,000 customers means we are serving almost all physical products industries. That gives also us a lot of opportunities, a lot of challenges. As big brands, of course, they want always to be the first on consumers' choices with most sustainable product, including packaging offering. And here we are also championing, and with Better Planet Packaging, our initiative, we are creating packaging solutions which, as we say, leave no trace for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jurgita. It was very interesting, especially, you know, to listen how you integrate your acquisitions into your sustainability reporting and baseline. I believe this is something that not many think of. And now it's time for our Q&A session. So we have some questions in the chat. Dear participants, please do write your questions if you still have some, and we will try to answer. Now, first question from the audience is to Martina. Our audience member is asking, how do you detect greenwashing during the M&A process, and how would you deal with it in the context of documentation?
It's a very good question, because this is becoming more and more a topic that we actually see on the sell side. I assume this question was asked from a buy side perspective, but let me give you an insight what sell side thinks on those topics. So in the past year, we have been involved in a transaction where the sell side said that they would like to dispose a business line because it contained brown, so we call them brown assets. And the storyline, obviously, within the company was that they need to get rid of it because it doesn't fit their company needs, and the company has decided to be a lot more ESG compliant and to really change the portfolio. And by doing that, they needed to dispose those brown assets. And what I really enjoyed in this process is that the sell side was very clear on that. So when they prepared their info memo, because it was a bidding process, they said, obviously, it's not an asset that is ESG compliant, but they don't see an opportunity to integrate it and to make it ESG conform, and therefore they think it needs a new acquirer in order to implement it differently, to either liquidate it, to integrate it into a different company. So one of the reasons that the storyline was so clear is that the seller wanted to avoid to have this reputational damage at the end, that somebody would point their fingers on the sell side and say, oh, wait a moment, that's greenwashing what you are doing. So I think you really need to make sure that depending on obviously on which side you are, on the buy side or the sell side, but in that case, you really need to make sure not to have this reputational risk that somebody points the finger on you, and to find other ways, right? So greenwashing is something that can always be said in the moment where we are disposing an asset. And I think it's important to see whether there are any other ways to integrate or to make it ESG conform. And then if not, just to be very transparent about it. I hope this is going into the right direction with the answer.
Yes, thank you very much. And, you know, I think it was very interesting because this was a good example. Have you seen, Martina, any bad examples? For example, you see that there is some ESG framework which it is purely declarative, only documents. How do you deal with that?
I'm just thinking on examples. I mean, I haven't been involved in the process, but I know it from the press. So Germany, there was a private equity fund that actually did the labeling. Obviously, they did not implement the relevant measures, but just labeled it as something that has been implemented. So that's, I guess, a very bad, obvious example, right? If you put something on your brand, a label, then you better make sure that it's also practice. And I think we are now, and this is why I mentioned that due diligence is having a bigger importance, is that. And now I'm looking from a buy side into it. So buyers won't be happy with seeing a document that is labeled as ESG compliant, saying we are ESG conform, we are green, we have impact, whatever it is. They would want to see the underlying implementation of it. And this is what we have seen in the management session. So even though there is document and the document is not perfect or detailed, the management sessions were very much focusing on, oh, and how are you implementing that in the target? So how are you reporting on that? Do you have like on this Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, there is something like in the whistleblowing directive. So you need to have a platform for the employees that they can include a breach that they have been seeing. So I think it's all about implementation. If you label it, make sure that you have a system underneath.
Thank you very much. We have another question from the audience, and I would like to address it first to Ruta and then to Jurgita. A question is regarding carbon neutrality, and our audience says that some investment funds require their portfolio companies to become carbon neutral, at least within Scope 1 and 2 emissions. Some funds suggest it is a voluntary commitment, as shown earlier today. However, the EU is planning to ban claims of carbon neutrality via offsets within 1-2 years, unless it's voted down, though not considered likely, as our audience member writes. So theoretically, a company faces a pressure from shareholders or potential buyers to do something that might not necessarily be legal quite soon. So how are you approaching the offsets topic, and how would you navigate a similar situation? Ruta.
Sure. So firstly, maybe just to define, so then, like if, for example, you are stating that you're carbon neutral, actually it means that you are not really doing something to reduce your greenhouse gases. It's just to offset. It means just you're paying to offset the greenhouse gases you have created, and that's it. So even with the years, it can even increase, but as long as you're just paying for the credits and you're offsetting those, that's in terms of being carbon neutral, it's okay. So, I mean, from our own perspective, the first point is just to understand your standing point. But the first thing would be to reduce your greenhouse gases as much as possible. So maybe that would go more like into being net zero carbon, meaning that the first thing you do is just to reduce as much as possible. But anyways, maybe it's not that 100% possible to remove those totally. And then you can just go for the offsets or reductions, meaning that even though like you're contributing, that these are not only offsetted, but I mean, you're contributing maybe to the technologies or to some of the services which are making sure that these are removed from the atmosphere. So I mean, being carbon neutral, maybe it's better than nothing, but we are going more in terms of at least like being net zero carbon, making sure that you are looking at your standing point and you are looking into the actions, like where do you contribute the most to create those greenhouse gases and what do you do to remove those? Because, for example, if you would consider that there is a tax for greenhouse gases, right? So whatever, like if you're offsetting those anyways, you will have to pay additionally. So the less you consume and the less you create those greenhouse gases, it's better for you in terms of any kind of additional costs, as well like negative impact to the environment. So yeah, just to wrap up, indeed, firstly to reduce and to look into your main areas where you create those the most. And I mean, usually it's like scope 3. I mean, as well, like as Jurgita has mentioned, for them it's like scope 1 indeed, but like in most of the companies, usually it's like scope 3 we are working with, and we are not trying to avoid that area, making sure that this one is covered, and like you're looking into how can you work within the years to the reduction of emissions in that field, and then maybe to offset and remove.
Thank you very much, Ruta. So, and Jurgita, what are your views on the offsetting, and maybe even you have some views on those potential legal developments in the EU mentioned by our audience?
So honestly, I very much agree with Ruta. Smurfit Kappa, in Smurfit Kappa, we never considered offsets. Because in general, it is, as Ruta says, is just you continue to emit, but you offset it. And that is in general not the correct approach. You always have to focus to reduce your emissions. If you talk about scope 1 and 2, theoretically, it is very easy to be carbon neutral for majority of the companies who are, according to SBTi, only 10% of companies in the world are large in scope 1, like we are. 90% are largest in scope 3, right? So if we eliminate scope 3, we are staying with scope 1 and 2. Scope 1 is your direct fuel use. Many companies don't need that. They just have electricity. So if you buy from a green electricity provider, you can relatively easy become carbon neutral on your scope 1 and 2. Still, your scope 3 remains there, right? And scope 3 is for majority of the companies is 95% of your emissions. So to become really carbon neutral is very difficult today, and therefore offsets are considered. I hope really that it will soon be not the case that offsets can buy you the way out, and you actually will actively need to just focus in emissions reduction. Because offsets is, as I said, for me, is sorry to say so, but it's a little bit of greenwashing already today, because offsets has a lot of also questionable practices behind, right? It sounds theoretically nice, but how they practically work in the past, there was, of course, I know the situation has changed and improved, and there is a lot of traceability and credibility and all kind of audits behind offsetting. But in the past, it did not had a very successful, let's say, implementation and actual effects. Because if you create emissions here and you plant trees somewhere on the other side of the world, you also have to be sure that those trees are staying there for decades or hundreds of years to absorb those emissions which you emitted and continue to emit somewhere else. So it's a little bit of this, you know, we say in Smurfit Kappa, it's a little bit like going to church on Sunday, saying your sins to the priest, and he forgives you, and then you go again to make your sins for the next week. So it's a little bit questionable. I think for us, offsets were never the case to consider. We never used offsets to reduce our emissions. It was always plan not B, C, but plan Z, just in worst case scenario, what if? You always, first of all, need to go to look into your scope 1 and 2 and to reduce emissions there, and work with your value chain to reduce emissions from your scope 3.
Thank you very much. So I guess it is very clear that views of our speakers from business are quite negative on those offsets. But if I may then ask Martina, how would you deal with this topic in your LDD on buy side? Would this be kind of amber color finding or red flag or something?
I think that's something that we would review, obviously, for anything that that is relevant for the legal due diligence. And for the legal due diligence, what we come across is on the question, well, how do you actually deal with your CO2 reduction? Are there any guidelines internally of the target that reach out to the employees in order to inform the target we are working on CO2 neutrality? And Jurgita made a very clear point on obviously this is, and because I was asked the topic on the greenwashing, it may be seen as greenwashing, but I really think it depends on the target. It depends on the sector. And if you are a producing company, sometimes it's hard to really be CO2 neutral without the offsetting. So my suggestion is always be transparent. If you're offsetting, make clear internally within your documentation that you're offsetting for that price in order to do that. So if legal advisors, let's take that example, need to negotiate an agreement in Asia or the States, we need to fly there, right? And what we are doing as a company, we are also offsetting, because by taking a plane, we are not CO2 neutral in that sense. So we need to offset. And we have internal guidelines. We are very transparent. We are, by the way, being asked as legal advisors also by certain clients, how ESG compliant are you actually? And it's about documenting the fact and making clear we are aware of that and we are ready to pay the price in those events if there is no other way to take the train, to exaggerate. So the very same would apply for the targets that are planned to being divested, for example, and really talking to the employees and making sure that, and it's tiny topics, right? Electricity, please turn off your computers, turn off the lights, and make sure that if you have like fruits and vegetable baskets, that they're locally from a local supplier. And if you gather all that, it's a sign in our legal due diligence that the target is really dealing with that topic. But we would flag it to finalize it. We would just summarize it, for example, in the due diligence report, and then it's up to the buyer to see whether this is sufficient and suits within the strategy.
Thank you so much, Martina. We have another question for all three of you, perhaps, and I would ask Ruta, Jurgita, and then Martina to answer. Do you have any preferences from the buyer point of view regarding various ESG certifications and indices, MSCI, Sustainalytics, EcoVadis, B Corp, and etc.?
Sure. So from our own perspective, as we are investing in the very early stage companies, so they usually don't have those. I mean, maybe from our side, we can just look into the framework of those certificates or initiatives and, just to onboard within the time. But usually that is not something we would consider or require at the beginning. So, but that's just, in terms of our investment strategy and into the companies we are looking into. So, I mean, we as a fund maybe more looking into those, just to apply it for ourselves and to include those requirements maybe into the whole process of ESG integration and investment strategy. But no, currently we are not requiring those. I mean, if they have, of course, that's a huge bonus and benefit. But no, it doesn't stand as a requirement at the moment.
From Smurfit Kappa side, I think, well, it's a little bit maybe strange for me to comment on investments, as we are, well, just growing in our own industry. So basically we acquire the same, well, typical paper-based packaging companies, the paper mill or converting operation. So more or less we are judging by the same SBTI, so maybe forestry, I would say, and climate change are the most used criteria. But if I would look from our customers base, what they ask, so mainly I would say SBTI is always reviewed, CDP ratings, EcoVadis score, and then yes, various investors ratings, which I showed also. So and compliance to UN SDGs, and we have a list of those which are, I'm not sure if we publish them, if they are asked or evaluated by customers, not that much. Mainly by customers would be CDP, SBTI, EcoVadis, and FSC certification.
So maybe just to add one little point on the due diligence side. So again, I'm coming from a buy side perspective. And I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that there is a new due diligence supply chain act in Germany that might also be applicable at a certain stage at the European level. And I mean, there are a lot of great certification that exists, but what we do in the due diligence when we, for example, have a target that has a direct supplier and the target falls within this regulation of the Due Diligence Supply Chain Act. And it's, for example, and I'm just picking one, EcoVadis. It has EcoVadis within their system. It gives us, when conducting the legal due diligence, comfort that the target has really dealt with this regulation, because it's a great platform in order to look at the geography of the direct supplier, at the sector of the supplier, and it's just a great sign that the target is dealing with the regulatory requirements.
Thank you very much to all of you. We have a special thanks here in the chat to Jurgita from Laimonas Kybarka, Sorainen managing partner. But as our time came to the end, I would like to sincerely say thanks to all the speakers. It was very valuable, very insightful. Sorainen will continue regional ESG webinars next year, so please join and have a nice day ahead.